Good evening and welcome to StarCast. From Planet Waves, I'm Eric Francis Coppolino, your friendly neighborhood astrologer, here with the audio accompanying the monthly horoscope for Virgo season, called the September monthly, but really this is about Virgo season, and I would like to read the chart for the ingress. The ingress happened this morning at 10:54 a.m., 10:55 actually Eastern Daylight Time. Before that, a couple of house announcements. I am intending to have the Virgo birthday reading quite soon. That should be Friday morning. I don't usually promise a date, but I've got the runway cleared for that, so we'll have that earlier in the season. And I am getting ready to do the 2025 annual edition. While I am prepping that, we have got the 2024 annual somewhere in between on a good sale, half price of its original, since it is getting toward the end of the year. That's for all 12 video and all 12 written. One of those standout annual editions. There are some that I like more than others. There are some that I think work better than others, and I was very happy with the way that Somewhere in Between came out, particularly the written readings, but people seem to like the video readings, which were done in this place that I call the Astrology Chalet, and I'm not really doing video readings anymore, so those will be the last annuals in video format, but in 2025 I will most certainly be doing audio. This is a much more appropriate format for reading astrology because I've got to keep my eyes on the chart and not staring into a little green light or looking at my face or worrying about the light. So here you go. The sun entered Virgo Thursday morning, August 22nd at 10:52 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time under a generally what I think of as a very interesting sky. There is quite a little cluster of things going on in Virgo. I've got that posted to my Facebook. Maybe I should put that in with the horoscope. These newsletters are getting a little bit crowded, and I've got quite a few photos in this week's horoscope edition. But let's see. Here's a rundown of what's in Virgo, just to give you an idea. And I look like I put a lot of planets in my charts that I use for these, and I put in some of them, but you know I'm tracking about 100 points, and I only put in the ones that jump out or that have a reason. But this is very exciting, what's going on in Virgo. So it's Sun, as of this morning when the Sun entered, Sun, Memoria, Isis trans Pluto, that's one of those imaginary planets, Apollo, Nemesis, Niobe, Sphinx, Atlantis, those are asteroids, Orcus, that's a thing like Pluto, right in the middle of Virgo, Aphidas, the oscillating apogee of the moon, that's this weird lunar point that's a lot of fun and doesn't represent things that are a lot of fun, but astronomically it's very interesting. Photographica, Astrea, Hecate, Venus, Therius, and Kagara. And holding up this cluster right in the middle of Virgo is this group. I'll read that little group again. Niobe, Sphinx, Atlantis, Orcus, Aphidas, the apogee, and Photographica. Those are all clustered within 3 little degrees right in the middle of Virgo. And so that's a lot of activity, a whole diversity of different things, commenting on the technological situation, which I get into in my article. And, well, that's really the important one. Atlantis, right in the middle of Virgo, is the thing that should be making us question whether we are in some kind of a, let's just say, Faustian bargain with the power of all of this computing technology, which is not really being used very well to support and sustain life on the planet, but really is more being used for people to learn how to be manipulators and entertain themselves and somewhat entertain other people. So, additionally, Venus is in Virgo. That's at 21 degrees of Virgo. And let's start with Venus in terms of the aspects that are in this chart. It's a chart of very precise aspects. And one of those is the square of Venus and Mars. And I put an article in last week's edition. It's right at the top. There's a paragraph. I should just kind of repeat that whole paragraph. And what you get with Venus square Mars is that it turns our feelings, our inner masculine and inner feminine, and the different types of desire nature that they represent. Venus is the kind of come hither desire, and Mars is the go hither kind of desire. Venus says, "Please come over, and I will make you a sumptuous dinner." Mars says, "I'm going to go get the girl." Or the boy, as the case may be. And these two are at a right angle right now. That is called a square. They are at exactly 90 degrees, by which I mean that the square is only off by like less than you could measure with if you were a carpenter and you put a tri-square against a 2x4, you would not notice that there was any variance at all in this 90-degree aspect. It's about 18 arc minutes, about 1/3 of 1 degree. So it's very close square with Venus applying to Mars. And the combination of Venus square Mars tends to turn our feelings, which is to say our sexual feelings, into some kind of a power drama. I mean, you might think, well, when do I do that? Well, you do it, for example, if there's somebody that you don't want to talk to, and you let them know that by ghosting them. Or there's someone that you do want to talk to, but you don't condescend to reaching out to them because you think that is just stooping too low. It is that other person's job to reach to me and to be vulnerable. And so there is an issue with vulnerability with Venus square Mars. I would even say that is the thing that is underneath the whole matter. But also, if you think of Venus and Mars as being these inner polarities that are in a 90-degree angle, that is some conflict between the two primary forms of desire, come hither and go hither. And so you may be vacillating back and forth. The way that squares work, and they work this way in your natal chart too, is that we will tend to work one leg of the square and experiment with that feeling and then pretend that that doesn't exist and go back and work the other end of the square and pretend that doesn't exist. The other one doesn't exist and go back and forth until the square is integrated. Now, with these being in the mutable signs, Mars being in Gemini and Venus being in Virgo, there is going to be some ambivalence inherent in the placements. And what mutable does is you think mutable changes, right? We know that, right? There's cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. Cardinal signs are assertive. Fixed signs stay put and kind of build on what they've got. Well, what does a mutable sign do? A mutable sign vacillates between fixed and cardinal. And so you've got that going on. Then you've got the two of them working together. And we've got Mars in Gemini. That is inherently dualistic. And we've got Venus in Virgo, which is itself trying to integrate the relationship between thoughts and feelings. And I would say that the antithesis to this is just to be straightforward about what you want and don't worry about the outcome. If you want someone and they turn out to not be interested in you, big deal. Move on. There can be no game. And remember that when we're talking about astrology or chaos theory or the Tao Te Ching, the conditions at the beginning determine the conditions at the end. And so if there's a game at the beginning, if there's some power struggle, if there's some little hide and go seek being played at the outset, at the fulcrum, that's going to have an influence on the outcome. And so act the way that you want people to treat you. And for the women in the audience, I believe, as a tantric practitioner, you have an obligation to bring wisdom to your situations. This is not about how cute you are or how hot you are or luring whatever or providing, finding someone to whatever or whatever. Your role in relationships is to be a source of wisdom. And that does not mean haughty. It does not mean know-it-all. It means to genuinely tune in to what you've got, to tune into your body. This is Hecate conjunct Venus in Virgo. And to bring something through that is relevant and that helps everyone. On the Mars side, and Mars is still, by the way, loosely conjunct Jupiter. In a natal chart, it would certainly be considered a conjunction, though it is separating. Mars is at 21 and Jupiter is at 17. They were conjunct about a week ago, maybe a little bit more. The admonition, the strong recommendation is to be gentle in your speech, to account for the multiple sides of your nature, and while you're being gentle and while you're accounting for both sides of your nature, to fully express what you want in words. That's not very stoic. We've got this concept of masculinity needing to be stoic. All right, now there's another bit of caution in the chart, which is that Venus is approaching in opposition to Neptune. That's in Pisces. And we've got a lot of Pisces going on, by the way, for all this Virgo to be playing off against. And Mars is approaching a square to Neptune. I've got one of the upcoming future horoscopes is going to be addressing specifically that Mars square Neptune, which takes place, I think, in about a week and a half, the middle of around the 5th-ish or so of September. And these squares and oppositions to Neptune can be self-destructive. And you want to monitor that. They can have a kind of a kamikaze quality to them, where I'm gonna sink this battleship by crashing my airplane into it. Well, that is self-destructive, and you haven't really won if you're not there. And what do you have, like that 5 seconds of satisfaction? But the kamikaze quality of Mars square Neptune or Venus opposite Neptune can come in the form of all is fair in love and war. It can come in the form of being deceptive. It can come in the form of trying to outsmart yourself. Mars in Gemini might be inclined to a form of denial because it can hide. The twins can pretend to keep secrets from one another, but Mars in Gemini square Neptune, well, that is potentially a lot deeper and more toxic deceit. Now, whenever there's what some astrologers call a hard aspect between Mars and Neptune, there's square, opposition, conjunction. I am cautious of and speak about caution in the use of particularly alcohol, but there are a heck of a lot of substances out there to use, and we've got quite a few people hitting on their vapes all day long, and makes me kind of wonder who is just very quietly high as a tree, and who is feeding their nicotine addiction. I mean, it's not a very fun way to feed a nicotine addiction. If I were going to do nicotine, I would smoke a pipe or something like physically pleasurable. I was covering medical industry, but speaking of these nicotine vapes, just before we get into the Capricorn cluster and the lunar nodes. So one of my first jobs out of school, my second job, in fact, out of school as a journalist, was I was working for a corporate newsletter firm, a really small company. Maybe there were like four writers, 3-4 full-time writers. I wrote a bunch of the newsletters, and these were things that were kind of like planet waves. It's where I got the idea that might have 1,000 subscribers or 2,000 subscribers, but we charged enough that you could actually pay a reporter to fly around the country. And I was covering medical and nursing education, which meant medical and nursing news. And they once sent me to the American, not the Journal of the American Medical Association, the actual conference. And it was in the late 80s, about 88. And the idea of a nicotine vape was first coming up. Believe it or not, it goes back that far. But it was being floated as a kind of a disposable crack pipe. Now, crack was a big thing in the 1980s. It's probably a big thing now, but it was a bigger thing then because it was new, and the product was not going to be this sleek little electronic vape that you charge on your laptop or something like that, but rather it was this kind of crude glass cigarette with a little bulb of nicotine, and you'd hit it up, you'd light it up and hit it like a crack pipe. And the American Medical Association was apoplectic about this. They said this is a drug delivery system for crystallized nicotine. And they were quite upset about this. So I thought that was funny. Every time I see a nicotine vape, I think, wow, it's a drug delivery system for crystallized nicotine. Tobacco crack freebase, which is exactly what it is. It is tobacco freebase. Now let's talk about FOLAs. So since we're on the subject of substances and addictive substances, and I'm more focused on food and alcohol with this configuration, largely due to the alcohol-related nature of Folus, a centaur, which has inherent in its myth a big vat of wine that is passed down the generations, that is the collective property of all the centaurs, but which gets opened up and is partly complicit in the commencement of a war between Heracles and the centaurs. And Ceres, which is about cereal, but cereal is about grain. The Vision Quest bass player, Daniel Grimsland, has as one of his projects a group called The Grape and the Grain. And we might say that Folus is about the grape, which is wine, and Ceres is about the grain, which is hard liquor, but also about food. Now, there's other points in this configuration, Quaoar and Apollon, which are family points and points of gathering, and then there's Ixion. But let's leave those out of the interpretation for now and just look at what I'm looking at, the printed points that come out in the chart. When you just use the charts that are available in the program, Folus, the second centaur, after Chiron, not an asteroid, and Ceres, the first asteroid, more like a planet, not really an asteroid. Ceres itself alone contains 1/3 of the mass of the inner asteroid belt. So you've got basically you've got a planet, you've got 3 additional large asteroids, which are Pallas, Juno, and Vesta, Vesta being the brightest asteroid, even though it's not nearly the largest. And then you've got a huge amount of very fun to divine off of driveway shale. And for driveway shale, these things really do show up in interesting places. But let's talk about Ceres retrograde, conjunct Folus retrograde, the grape and the grain, and these are 90 degrees, exactly 90 degrees to the lunar node. This is the one and only time this configuration is going to be so absolutely perfect at 8 degrees of the cardinal signs. South node, 704 Libra, north node, 704 Aries, and the grape and the grain at 7 and change of Capricorn. And when you've got something like this that is balanced on the lunar nodes, right? The grape and the grain are balanced on the lunar nodes. You can see that it's highlighted in red. I know there's a lot of lines drawn in this chart. Just look for things with a 7 next to them. There's only 4 of them in the chart with a number 7 printed, which is the 8th degree of the chart. And whatever this family legacy issue, which is Capricorn, which is Folus, and which is also Quaoar, and which is also Cupido, a lot of family legacy stuff in this, compacted into this little thing. Well, this is a really good time to be real with yourself about the extent to which how your life balances on these matters of food and the use of alcohol as they have been passed down through the generations. And that's where we get our values about food and alcohol. All of this diet stuff that's going on, all of this plant-based foods versus eat only beef thing that's going on, and the plant people saying that the beef is going to kill you, and the beef people saying the plants are full of all these lectins and these bizarre toxins, phytotoxins that basically make your intestines more porous, just like gluten does to celiac people. Well, all of this is about challenging family-oriented food values, i.e., there are certain things I'm just supposed to eat as an Italian kid. Now, one of them is a lot of spaghetti, and I happen to have celiac. Unfortunately, I know about this, and my wheat consumption is in the parts per million. I'm thrilled that I'm not having to eat all this garbage, hybridized wheat and all this crap out of deep fryers. But again, the challenge here, the ultimate challenge of adopting new food values is going past your family indoctrination on food. And it's also about going past your family indoctrination on alcohol. On the alcohol part, I'm lucky. My grandfather was the only big drinker, and he always reeked of cheap wine. And so it is very hard for me to drink a glass of wine. It has to be really good wine in exactly the right company. So sometimes it's easy, and then sometimes it's like you just do what your parents do, and sometimes you figure out that that's not helping you. So let's just take a look at the Sabian symbol where the grape and the grain are published. And I've got to get this recording to Daniel Grimsland, really the greatest musician I've ever worked with, casting no aspersions on the other Daniel, my guitar teacher and bandmate. Grimy could basically pick up anything and play it well. Okay, so they are a sunlit room, a sunlit home. Whoa. Capricorn 8, which is where this is, 7 and change. It's always anything more than 7 is 8. You're in the 8th degree. In a sunlit home, domesticated birds sing joyously. The wholesome happiness which subservience to the ideals and patterns of well-established culture brings to those who accept them unreservedly. So look, I'm cautionary here because there is so much pain and sorrow in our culture caused by food and alcohol. But maybe your relationship to these things is just fine. Maybe you know what you're doing. You have your form of appropriateness or your form of moderation, and the way that you live works. The way that you live works for you, and but it's still worth checking this out. It's still worth reviewing your situation and checking and seeing how you really feel. All right, now this is square the North Node at Aries 8. A large woman's hat with streamers blown by an east wind. Now the woman is missing. The woman's hat with streamers blown by the east wind. That symbol omits the woman, by the way. Keynote: protection and spiritual guidance in the development of consciousness. Dane Rudyard writes, this somewhat strange image can be understood if every stated feature in it is clearly analyzed without preconceptions. Here again we see a woman, but no, Dane. The woman's not in the picture. The woman is not in the text, but he's going to pretend that she's there because her presence is implied. But her head is covered with a large hat, protection against the forces of nature, i.e. cold and or penetrating rays of the sun. EF adds and or it's just stylish. At this emotional cultural level, phase 6 through 10, the mental processes are still largely undeveloped, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. The hat with the streamers blown by the wind, that is the North Node. The wind is always an invitation to spiritual influences. It's always an invitation to feel these spiritual influences, which in the case of the wind come across on the mental level. That's what wind is in our little branch of esoteric studies. All right, let's jump across the dial to Libra and see here. And I'm going to miss this aspect when it's gone. I think this pattern, this 5-pointed cluster, And please go back and read my article, The Family Hunger Games, if you want my first take on this. It was I had a lot of fun writing this. I was in a little hotel room up in the Catskills with feeling good and kind of having this leisurely experience of writing this deep article. Libra 8, the South Node, another domestic symbol, a blazing fireplace in a deserted home. Another symbol of the person missing. The person is missing from the hat symbol, opposite the person missing from the blazing fireplace in the deserted home. And Dane writes, the need to realize that even through the most empty hours, a spiritual power is ever ready to welcome and warm up the wayward consciousness returning to the center. Until the fire of the soul within the human psyche totally dies out, a rare and tragic occurrence, there's always the hope of recovery and re-beginning, etc. Someone taking care of this fire, by the way. It couldn't just burn by itself. Someone's got to actually feed and stoke these flames. So what have we got here? We've got Venus square Mars saying, please figure out what you want and be straightforward about it. And if you don't know what you want, but you know that you like somebody, say, I don't really know what I want, but let's get to know each other. And if you feel inclined to use any form of your manly or womanly wiles as some form of power device, maybe give it a miss. We've got way, way too much of this intrigue and scandal and manipulation. Meanwhile, the Capricorn cluster is at the very peak of its square to the lunar nodes. And remember that I'm making such a big deal about this because what is square the lunar nodes is what is required to use the lunar nodes. And these are very, very square the lunar nodes. And this is a fulcrum moment where we have concentrated power, concentrated ability to work through whatever is going on with this conjunction of the grape and the grain. And those opportunities, I think, ought to be taken because they are very rare. And this pattern will never line up again. Or if you run some computer search millennia into the future, for our epoch, for our lifetimes, this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And that's the beauty of working with the minor planets. So we've got those two things going. And by the way, Mars and Venus in a square can represent sexual inhibitions. Sexual inhibitions are often addressed by consuming alcohol, and not just alcohol, but large amounts of alcohol. Maybe you don't need alcohol. Maybe you don't need large amounts of alcohol. One great thing about cannabis, which is ubiquitous, is that a very small amount of cannabis can be inspiring of the sexual imagination and lowering of inhibitions without all of the physical toxicity and or barfy, pukey feeling that alcohol has, that sense of sloppy loss of control. But cannabis is a glider. It is not an airplane. And the thing that the cannabis is gliding in is the wind of your mind. And so your creativity is the thing that makes cannabis work, which is arguing for not needing it. But nonetheless, it can be fun and it can be dreamy. It's not just about kind of anesthetization. And by the way, while we're on the topic, and I've got a lot of notes on a piece I'm going to do soon on ubiquitous cannabis. It may work better as a radio piece. It'll save me like 8 hours of writing and maybe even be more fun. Because I've got about 50 reader comments giving observations about ubiquitous cannabis. But my old friend Betty Dodson had a theory of why cannabis was illegal. And she said it's one reason and one reason only, and that reason is that it very gently lowers sexual inhibitions. My concern is now that we are experiencing all this ubiquitous cannabis, which basically anybody can be hitting on their vape at any time, or on these supercharged high-potency edibles anytime, purchasable in gas stations, in the midst of this digital overwhelm. And anybody who has experimented with the combination of cannabis and digital, which must basically be everyone, unless you're like in Narcotics Anonymous and you count cannabis as a narcotic, cannabis has a way of making the unreal feel more real, and that's just more digital disembodiment. So pay attention to that. And I would say 'tis better to make art on cannabis than to consume art on cannabis, because when you're making art, your creative faculties are fully engaged. All right. Also, this month, Pluto is going to back into Capricorn for a very brief spell. I think that runs from basically from September 1st through about November 10th, so 10 or 15. So it's about 10 weeks remaining of the Pluto in Capricorn experience, which began in early 2008, and then we fully commence the Pluto in Aquarius experience in mid-November. So pretty much all of September is going to be Pluto in Capricorn, and that too, by the way, is one of those things that is about wrapping up old business. I'm not sure where I gave that a little rant recently, but I did somewhere. Like Alice Bailey, my work is scattered in various places. Mostly I keep it concentrated to this astrological work, to this podcast, and the Planet Waves article stream. All right, I think that pretty much wraps up what I've got to say at this point. There's all kinds of other adventure in the air. For example, it's going to be a beautiful kind of sextile bowl between retrograde Mercury, Mars in Gemini, and Chiron in Aries. Chiron is very active right now. Chiron in Aries is saying, wake up and pay attention and make the changes that you need to make in order to wake up and stay awake and keep paying attention, and to not so much tell the truth, but to seek an understanding and to not think you have gotten there when you haven't gotten there. All right, we're leaving this podcast open to all listeners on all channels. Thank you to those who are paying subscribers to Planet Waves in its various different forms, customers of my readings, the Virgo one coming out very soon, or who make a little contribution every month toward the horoscopes on Substack or on Planet Waves. I do my very best to make it worth every penny of your investment, and that is saying a lot, because I do this quite a bit, and I aspire to do it well, and not only to do it well, but to do it beautifully. That's my Italian genes coming through. All right, thank you again for tuning in. This week there is a horoscope, there is an article. This is the open access point. I have still got Planet Waves FM on a hiatus. I'll be back the first week of September. I am really enjoying not being married to a 3-hour program every Friday. It is this summer I will remember as a summer, largely for this reason. The show's going to come back in a whole new format, and while I'm still gabbing here, however, I'm doing some special short programs on the Planet Waves FM Substack. I'm not putting them all out on the Planet Waves list, but if you want to, I've got several really fantastic new pieces about the virus situation on the planetwaves.org Substack. That is also planetwavesfm.substack.com. The shortcut is planetwaves.org. Signing off from Kingston, New York at 1:50 p.m. on the 22nd of August. Thank you for tuning in. Lots of love, and bye for now.